brother! Guys, just a quick warning before we get started, there are going to be major spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home, so if you haven't seen it yet, you have been warned. But speaking of Far From Home, it is finally out and I loved it. Personally, I thought Mysterio was absolutely perfect. There were Easter eggs hidden all over the place, but the big thing that we always have to talk about whenever a new Marvel movie drops is what does that post-credit scene mean? And this was a big one, so let's dive on in. Before we get started, you may notice that I am wearing a Super Carlin Brothers Captain America Iron Man t-shirt. This was the t-shirt from our Avengers Endgame meetup, which was in Blacksburg, Virginia, but we have one coming up this month in Chicago where we are going to be seeing The Lion King. These shirts are just as cool, but admittedly more Lion King themed. The event is taking place on July 20th. Tickets are in the link in the description down below. Definitely check it out. It's great to meet you guys. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, in this movie, there are actually like 3 end credit scenes. There's like the pre-credits, and then there's like the mid-credits, and then the post-credits. So maybe pre-credit scene is not the best way to describe it, but like what would you call it? Like the end of the movie? No, actually that is pretty good. We can call it the end. Okay, so as the movie is wrapping up, the first little thing that I noticed is that MJ is wearing the necklace. Now, so of course we know that throughout the movie, Peter has been trying to like meticulously plan a scenario where he could be alone with MJ in some type of romantic spot so he could give her this necklace. Specifically a glass Black Dahlia necklace, which he thinks she'll love because of the murder. The murder being a reference to a very famous unsolved murder from LA in the 40s. And Peter's plan falls apart pretty much at every single turn, and eventually he ends up completely breaking the necklace, but she loves it all the more anyway. And this might just be like a cool token that Peter was able to give MJ, but within Marvel's history, there actually exists a group of women vigilantes that are called the Black Dahlias. That said, they don't have superpowers, seem to usually defend women, and actually ultimately end up like as bad guys, which doesn't really seem to fit in with MJ's character, who has never in the history of the character had a dual identity. But nonetheless, the necklace is heavily referenced throughout the film. There is a legion of characters that go by the name Black Dahlias, and it seems like this MJ is a totally new take on the character from the start, so make of that what you will. Next is this scene where you can see Peter and MJ whipping through New York, and in the background on some fences, you can see the words, "We can't wait to show you what comes next," and then the numbers 1, 2, 3, and then a question mark. For me, I think there are 2 potential interpretations as to what this is supposed to mean, and it's definitely not an accident. First is that it's simply a nod to the fact that Far From Home is the first episode of the 4th phase of the MCU, and it's a question mark because we have no idea what's coming. Though we do have guesses, but we'll come back to that in a moment. On the other hand, there is a very famous family within the Marvel universe that Disney just so happened to buy the rights to, and that is the Fantastic Four. So it's possible that the number 4 being replaced with a question mark is sort of a nod to the idea that they're coming eventually. Personally, I'm thinking this is probably just a nod to the fact that it's the start of Phase 4. But the Human Torch and Peter are super good friends in the comics, so there is that as some kind of connective tissue. And there has been some speculation that the huge Avengers Tower in the heart of New York City could go on to be the home base for the Fantastic Four, aka the Baxter Building. Moving on though, Peter finally drops MJ off on the ground, who immediately says that she's never going to be doing that again, which frankly, I don't understand at all. But he goes to swing off only to catch a news report about none other than himself, being delivered by none other than J. Jonah Jameson of the Daily Freaking Bugle. It is about time! But what's even better about this particular scene is the Who that is reprising his role as JJJ, none other than J.K. Simmons. Oh my gosh, let me just tell you how bad I feel for you if you happen to be the one person in the theater who didn't understand why this was huge and everybody around you was clapping. Here's why.
Move Conway to page 7.
There's a problem with page 7.
I make it page 8 and give him 10% off. I make it 5%.
That can't be done.
Get out of here!
That's why J.K. Simmons as JJJ, or as I like to call him, J-Cubed, is the most perfect casting of any character of all time. Like, nobody else could play this character but him. And he's back! and it feels good. And right away, he outs Peter as Spider-Man, so that's kind of crazy. But I mean, what else would you expect from J-Cube? That guy means business. But seriously, I actually kind of loved this because so much of Far From Home revolved around this idea that like Peter was trying to fill in Tony's shoes and like become the next Iron Man. And this form of like having his true identity shared with the world is like a super interesting foil with the way that like Tony revealed that he is in fact Iron Man.
I am Iron Man.
Oh my god, that gives me chills now. As did Peter building the suit on the plane. Like, I had to hold back tears. So aside from the fact that Peter now has to deal with the fact that the entire world knows his true identity, or probably has to deal with some way of covering it up, I don't know, like shape-shifting aliens or something, but more on that in a second. J-Cube's appearance also speaks to the future of the characters of Ned and Betty. Betty has historically been J-Cube's secretary, and since we've already kind of seen her work in like the morning news for the school, it would kind of make sense that she would go on to work for the Daily Bugle. Ned, on the other hand, has historically been an investigative reporter for the Daily Bugle. But I also think it's worth pointing out that the Daily Bugle is not a newspaper like we've always seen it in the past, but rather a kind of like BuzzFeed news source type of thing, like dailybugle.net, which totally sounds like the kind of place who would hire the young hip blip people like Betty and Ned. But that brings us to the huge reveal in the post-credit scene where we discover that Nick Fury has actually been Talos, a Skrull, the whole time. Like, you know, for this movie, not like the whole time. In case you need a refresher on who Talos is, he was actually believed to be the main villain of Captain Marvel for the better part of the movie, until it was finally revealed that he's kind of just a family man and a refugee trying to reunite his people. Talos is a leader within the alien race called Skrulls, which are able to shapeshift into anyone they see, and with that also be able to take on some of their most recent memories. Nick, or Talos, Nalos? Tick, yes! Tick tells Peter in the movie that he first met him at Tony's funeral and thought that it would be a bad time to exchange numbers. Which means it's possible the Nick that we saw at Tony's funeral is not actually him at all, but rather Talos. Which brings about a particularly interesting question, like, why does Nick have Talos representing him on Earth, and what is he doing off in space? Well, when it comes to Fury and the Skrulls in the MCU, there is really only one bit of connective tissue, and that is Captain Marvel. So I think on the most basic level, you could say that whatever is happening in this post-credit scene and whatever he's doing up in space is setting up for the events of Captain Marvel 2. Which of course immediately brings us to the question, what could be happening in Captain Marvel 2? Well, there are a couple of hints that the movie drops throughout where you don't know that Nick is actually secretly Talos in disguise that might have something to do with exactly that. The first one is when Peter asks Tick, like, why can't we just call in Captain Marvel? And Tick totally freaks out on him being like, do not invoke her name! And Peter is all like, okay, chill, bro! Pretty spot on Tom Holland and Samuel L. Jackson, if I do say so myself. The second one, though, is when Tick is on the phone after they defeated the first 4 elementals, and he says something along the lines of, how was I supposed to know the Kree had sleeper cells? When you believe this is just Nick Fury on the phone, it just sort of seems like the type of business phone call he might be taking based on his current line of work. But when you know it's Talos, it kind of takes on a slightly different meaning. Sleeper cells, in case you don't know, are a secretive group of terrorists or spies that are basically lying inactive in wait of further orders. They could be kind of like a worst case scenario team that the Kree have waited to use until now. And since they've been dealing with Captain Marvel for the past 25 years, it's probably about time to wake them up. Or should I say, wake him up. Dun dun dun! What I mean by that is that Captain Marvel 2 is definitely going to involve her dealing with these sleeper cells. And will also almost definitely need to introduce some kind of new villain that is comparable in some way to Captain Marvel. Which, in order to qualify as that, is to say a galactic level threat. So it definitely brings up the question of like, who might that be? And fair warning, this is when we definitely step into the area of a little bit more speculation and just sort of reading into leaked information. So far, the rumored villain for Captain Marvel 2 is a character by the name of Michael Korvac, or more commonly, simply Korvac. Not to be confused with Cormac McLagan, the almost keeper for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, or Corvus Lestrange, the almost real identity of Credence, because those are totally 2 different franchises altogether. Korvac is a half-man, half-machine hybrid character who comes in contact with the power cosmic and can pretty much just shape reality around him. Jump through space, time, dimensions, you know, normal stuff. And also just absorb any kind of energy and just redirect it as he sees fit. To me, he kind of sounds like a walking, talking Infinity Gauntlet that could range anywhere from like a Captain Marvel 2 villain to like the overarching villain of the entire Phase 6 finale. But in the comics, like I said earlier, he gets his power from the power cosmic, which is typically associated with the mega villain Galactus. So to that end, I could see Korvac playing like a Loki style role here, where he's like a mini boss that ultimately leads up to like the mega boss at the end. But really, it's kind of hard to have any concrete takeaways from Nick Fury walking around this space station with no shoes on. Other than that, he's probably setting up some type of like galactic-wide shield organization that almost definitely involves Captain Marvel. Personally, I like Korvac as the next like major mini Loki grade villain, because the more you learn about him, the more he kind of fits in with the themes that Far From Home used to kick off Phase 4. Specifically this concept of not having any idea who or what to trust and who might actually be who. Especially because as great of a threat as Korvac is to the heroes in the comics, it's ultimately determined that the entire time all he was ever really trying to do was to help. So that would kind of make him like a hero hiding as a villain who ultimately turns out to be okay-ish. So basically Loki. Honestly, we could probably make an entire video about how Korvac would fit really nicely into the MCU. He definitely falls into this like greater story arc called the Secret Wars, which is just about as big as the Infinity Saga, and within that there is actually an even smaller segment of time called the Korvac Saga, so there's a whole lot going on there. It's super interesting. I highly recommend you check it out. Guys, for my question of the day, did you see anything else in this post-credit scene that we did not see? What did you think of Far From Home? Were you so excited to see J-Cube return? I totally was. Leave all your thoughts in the towel section down below. Also guys, again, if you would like to meet Jay and I in person, we are hosting a meetup in Chicago on July 20th. Tickets are still available. Link is in the description down below. We'd love to meet you. But guys, as always, thanks for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to see some more Spider-Man Marvel action from us, you can check out this video right here to figure out why J-Cube just always hates Spider-Man, or this video right here where we go over some of the other major potential threats to the MCU. But Jay, that's all I've got for you today, man. I will see you on Tuesday.